Is this the first documented commercial fraud in history? As far as surviving records go, yes. This story centers on a real merchant named Ea-nasir, and a clay letter widely cited as the earliest surviving written customer complaint on Earth. It's an ancient dispute over bad copper that reads like a Bronze Age fraud case. Picture Mesopotamia around 1750 BCE, in the city of Ur on the lower Euphrates. Money isn't coins yet. It's barley, silver, and receipts baked in clay. Loans, deliveries, and promises are tracked on tablets pressed with wedge-shaped signs. Long before Wall Street, people here argued about quality, weights, and repayment, and kings issued laws to keep merchants honest. Our story opens with a tablet in a major museum, a letter from a buyer named Nanni to the trader, Ea-nasir. The accusation is blunt. Ea-nasir supplied substandard copper, not the promised grade, and treated Nanni's agent with open contempt. Nanni refuses the ingots and demands his money back and good metal, not junk. It's the oldest surviving "your product is trash, make it right" message we've got. This wasn't a legal vacuum. In the old Babylonian world, interest and commerce were regulated. Typical caps of about 20% on silver and about 1/3 on grain show up in later law collections. The law cracked down on rigged weights and on changing terms after the fact. In bad harvest years, some rules even suspended interest so debtors wouldn't be destroyed. The system prized fair measures and punished fraud. Sometimes things got so out of control that kings proclaimed clean-slate edicts, broad cancellations of personal debts to reset the system and pull people back from the edge. That's the economic weather behind our case, and it helps explain why a single bad copper deal could spark a very public, very permanent complaint in clay. So, can we title this video, "The First Documented Commercial Fraud in History"? Yes, with one careful note. This tablet is the earliest surviving written complaint that clearly details a commercial quality scam and bad faith treatment by a merchant. You can look up the object and its museum record. From this tiny tablet, a bigger story unfolds about trust, law, and the birth of business ethics. Picture Ur on the lower Euphrates. There are no coins yet. People reckon value in barley and silver, and they record deals on clay tablets, pressed while wet, then dried or fired so the record holds up. Much of this bookkeeping grew out of temple and palace storehouses, where rations and loans were measured out and logged. Thousands of these tablets survive, including early examples that track grain distributions and wages, basically payroll and accounts in clay. In this world, a tablet is both a receipt and an IOU. A buyer and a seller fix quantity, quality, and delivery terms. A courier carries the tablet as proof. Units follow a base 60 logic: talent, mina, shekel. If you're moving barley or copper, you think in agreed weights, not brand names. Disputes often turned on quality and weight, not just whether something arrived. Law wasn't theoretical. By the old Babylonian period, rulers were regulating commerce. The law tradition associated with Hammurabi set familiar guideposts: typical caps of about 20% on silver loans and about 1/3 on grain, along with rules against rigged scales and changing terms after the fact. In bad harvest years, some provisions softened or suspended interest so debtors weren't crushed by forces of nature. That's a Bronze Age version of consumer protection. Even with rules, debt pressure could snowball. Families slid toward bondage. Fields went untilled. To keep the system from seizing up, rulers sometimes proclaimed clean-slate edicts, broad cancellations of personal debts that reset household obligations and got people back to work. Historians trace these amnesties across centuries. They weren't charity so much as macroeconomic maintenance. That's the background to our case. Enter our named figure, Ea-nasir, a real trader on the Dilmun route, known from multiple tablets. The most famous is a letter from a buyer called Nanni. In it, Nanni accuses Ea-nasir of delivering substandard copper, not the promised grade, and of mistreating Nanni's agent. He refuses the ingots, demands good metal or his money back, and makes it formal in writing. Curators and record-keepers widely cite this object as the earliest surviving written customer complaint. It reads like an early commercial quality fraud dispute. You can even look it up by museum number. Why open with this? Because it's the human face of the system you just heard about. Weights and measures, tablets as IOUs, regulated interest, and official concern for fairness. Ea-nasir's case isn't rumor, it's archaeology. The tablet was excavated at Urur. Translations are widely available, and the story matches what we know about Mesopotamian trade norms and enforcement. When a merchant cut quality or a scale was off, the remedy wasn't a review cite. It was a cuneiform complaint, and it could lead to legal action under royal law. A courier arrives, not with coins, but with a clay letter, a formal complaint dried so the words endure. The tablet is addressed to Ea-nasir. Today, that very letter is catalogued as a complaint from Nanni about the wrong grade of copper, plus delays or misdirection on another shipment and mistreatment of his agent. Who are these people? Ea-nasir is a trader linked to the Dilmun route in the Gulf. He buys copper abroad and sells it in Mesopotamia. Nanni is a buyer who says he paid, then found the ingots substandard, and refused delivery. He also accuses Ea-nasir of disrespecting his agent, the go-between who carried the money and handled the pickup. These details come from the object record and from widely circulated summaries used by scholars and reporters. Walk the transaction step by step. First, agreement on quality and weight, because deals hinge on standardized measures. Second, payment via an agent. Third, inspection, the moment of truth when the buyer or his representative checks the metal. Fourth, rejection. Nanni refuses the copper he considers below grade and puts his grievance in writing. In modern legal language, this is a Bronze Age paper trail, a notice of nonconformity, a demand for cure or refund, and a record of alleged bad faith treatment. In plain words, the thrust of Nanni's letter is this: you promised one quality and delivered another. You took my money. You disrespected my man. I will not accept this copper, make it right. That tone, paired with a physical record, is why the tablet is highlighted as the oldest surviving written customer complaint. Why did this escalate? Because quality and weights were regulated topics, not trivial quibbles. Old Babylonian law punished rigged scales and protected parties against changing terms after the fact. The law tradition linked to Hammurabi set recognizable caps, about 20% on silver and about 1/3 on grain, and in some bad harvest years, relaxed interest so debtors weren't crushed by nature. There was already a legal culture that cared about fair dealing. A merchant who cut copper quality wasn't just annoying a customer. He was crossing a line the state cared about. Zoom out for excavation context. The tablet comes from digs led by Sir Leonard Woolley in the early 20th century. That house context yielded business documents. Other tablets tied to Ea-nasir's circle suggest that more than one buyer had issues. Names like Arbiturum and Imgur Sin appear in related complaints. Repeated disputes help historians see Ea-nasir not as a one-off misunderstanding, but as a problem merchant by reputation. So what did Nanni want? In today's terms, conforming goods or a refund, plus basic respect for his agent. The letter documents payment, rejects the tendered copper, and flags unacceptable conduct. Whether Ea-nasir complied is unknown. Clay doesn't include a signed settlement, but we don't need the verdict to see the precedent. A buyer using documentation, not gossip, to hold a seller accountable in a system where such records could be cited before officials. How did a Clay complaint become a case? In old Babylonian Mesopotamia, commercial disputes could move from a private grievance to a public hearing before judges and city elders. Contracts, receipts, and letters, your paper trail, were clay tablets, often sealed and witnessed. In court, parties presented their tablets, named witnesses, and, if facts were contested, could be required to swear an oath before the gods. In that world, perjury invited divine punishment. What would Nanni actually do with his tablet? Step 1. Present the complaint as formal notice of non-conforming goods. The text alleges substandard copper delays or misdirection on another shipment and mistreatment of an agent. Step 2. Show supporting tablets for payment, for the agreed weight and quality, and for courier instructions, plus any witnesses who saw the handover. When documents conflicted, courts could compel oath-taking to settle contested facts. Which laws applied? Mesopotamian law didn't have a single fraud statute, but several clusters covered situations like this. Merchant and agent rules discouraged bad faith accounting by threatening heavy penalties for deceptive claims. Receipts and deposits were recognized. Tablets served as proof. Weights, measures, and fair dealing were standardized and protected. Laws punished rigged scales and post hoc rate hikes. Familiar interest caps, about 20% on silver and about 1/3 on grain, reflect a broader ethos of regulated fairness in commerce. What remedies were available? For a quality dispute like bad copper, officials could order cure, deliver the agreed grade or restitution, return the payment, and could add penalties when a party acted in bad faith. The spirit of proportionate penalties shows up in rules about merchant-agent disputes and in clauses punishing corrupt judges. The pattern is clear. Documented deception means a heavy penalty. If a dispute turned into a debt spiral, failure to resolve it could push a buyer or a seller toward default. Rulers knew how dangerous that was. Across centuries, they sometimes issued clean-slate edicts, canceling personal debts, and freeing debt servants to stabilize society and get fields tilled again. These amnesties were macroeconomic resets, not handouts. That's the backdrop to any case like Nanni versus Ea-nasir. How did Mesopotamians prove metal quality without brands or lab tests? They leaned on 3 pillars still recognizable today: standard weights and measures, documented contracts, and witnessed inspection. Commerce ran on balance scales and calibrated weights, duck-shaped or stone weights marked to units like shekel, mina, and talent. Tablets recorded what grade and weight were promised, and who watched the handover. If a dispute erupted, those same tablets and witnesses went before judges and elders. Weights came first. Merchants used balance scales with standardized counterweights. Archaeology preserves both the weights and their typical masses. Mesopotamian shekels often cluster around 8.3 to 8.4 grams. Quality started with correct weight. If ingots were light, or if the counterweights were off, the buyer had a clear, testable claim. Then came visible grade and the agreed terms. Cuneiform deals often specify the type or grade and delivery expectations. That's the core of Nanni's letter. The copper was the wrong grade, and he formally refuses it. This is not fan lore. It's exactly what the surviving description of the tablet says. What did inspection look like? No spectrometers. Inspectors relied on appearance, casting quality, and workability at the point of delivery under standardized weights and measures. If facts were contested, procedure allowed tablets and witnesses. In hard cases, courts could compel sworn oaths. Think of it as a Bronze Age chain of custody, documentation, an eye check, and community verification. And the law backed the process. The Hammurabi tradition standardizes weights and measures, punishes rigged scales, and sets recognizable interest caps. That signals the state saw manipulation as a public problem, not a private spat. Those codes also recognize receipts and witnessed tablets as proof in court. That's why Nanni's written refusal matters. It's the kind of record officials expected to see. Where does Ea-nasir fit on the map of trade? He wasn't a village peddler. Texts link him to the Dilmun route in the Gulf, buying copper abroad and selling it in Mesopotamia. The complaint we have is part of a cluster of tablets from Ur. Other letters name additional buyers unhappy with copper quality or delivery. That suggests a pattern, not just a bad day. The point is simple. The case is personal. You can look up the tablet. But it also reveals the system: long-distance metal trade meeting, local rules, and scrutiny. So what counted as proof of bad copper? First, weight that didn't match standardized units. Second, non-conformity with the agreed grade, asserted by the buyer or agent and checked by officials. Third, conduct, mistreating the agent or tinkering with terms, which could push a dispute toward legal penalties. How does one bad batch sink a Bronze Age merchant? Start with Ea-nasir's world. Long-distance copper runs via Dilmun to Ur, payment and promises tracked on clay tablets, weights and measures standardized, deals witnessed and seal-stamped. When Nanni rejects wrong-grade copper, that's a sudden cash flow shock. Paid silver is tied up in disputed stock. Revenue stalls. Reputation takes a hit. Domino 1. Inventory you can't move. If a buyer formally refuses the metal, the merchant is left holding non-conforming ingots. Without modern refining or branding to resell quickly, that stock is illiquid. Crews, storage, and couriers still need to be paid. Cash burns while copper sits. Domino 2. Reputation and repeat business. A cluster of related tablets suggests other buyers had issues in the same circle. In any trust-based market, multiple complaints mean higher counterparty risk. Agents demand stricter terms, advances shrink, and new financing gets harder. Working capital tightens even if the merchant survives the first dispute. Domino 3. Contract exposure and legal costs. Disputes move to hearings. Parties bring tablets and witnesses and may be compelled to take oaths. If officials accept the buyer's case, remedies include cure or restitution. Either outcome creates immediate cash strain for a merchant already short of liquid silver. Domino 4. Penalties for bad faith. Mesopotamian law didn't package fraud into one statute, but it penalized documented deception and rigged measures. Standardized weights and measures, bans on post hoc changes to terms, and recognizable interest caps all say the same thing. Manipulation is a public problem. If the conduct reads as bad faith, penalties can multiply the hit beyond a simple refund. Domino 5. Financing costs don't wait. Merchants lived on credit cycles. If silver was borrowed, the meter kept running. Some rules softened interest in bad harvest years to protect households, but commercial silver loans, the lifeblood of trade, usually didn't get that relief. That's how a product dispute turns into insolvency-like pressure. Domino 6. Collateral and the human cost. When debts cascaded, enforcement followed the law. Famous clauses in the Hammurabi Corpus outline limits and safeguards, including time-bound service for pledged family members. That shows the social endpoint risk in this economy. If cash dries up, consequences extend beyond ledgers to household labor and status, the kind of damage kings later tried to reverse with personal debt amnesties. So did Ea-nasir go bankrupt? Mesopotamia didn't have a modern bankruptcy code, so let's avoid anachronism. But the mechanics of failure are familiar. Rejected goods, frozen cash, reputation drag, legal restitution or penalties, and maturing finance. That sequence can push a trader into a default-like collapse even without a formal statute. What actually happens after a clay complaint? A dispute like Nanni versus Ea-nasir could move from a written grievance to a hearing before judges and elders. Parties brought their tablets, contracts, receipts, and letters, named witnesses, and, if facts still clashed, might be required to swear an oath. Oath-taking wasn't ceremonial fluff. It was a final truth test in a culture that treated perjury as a religious offense. The remedies. If officials found the goods non-conforming, they could order cure, deliver the agreed quality, or restitution, return the payment. The broader legal tradition shows a marked preference for documented honesty. Merchants who gamed agents or measures faced penalties meant to deter bad faith. Judges who corrupted a decision faced removal and heavy fines. The point isn't a one-to-one match with modern statutes. It's a system biased toward fair weights, witnessed deals, and enforceable remedies. How Nanni's case fits. The surviving description of the tablet is explicit. The wrong grade of copper, misdirection or delay, and mistreatment of an agent. That trio maps neatly onto issues courts could address. Replace the grade, repay the silver, stop the games with weights and delivery, and hold the merchant's behavior to public standards. Not every fight reached a verdict. As now, many disputes ended in private settlements, once the stakes were clear. The existence of a formal complaint tablet already put pressure on the seller. It created a durable record that could be read to officials. In a city like Ur, where long-distance merchants survived on repeat customers and agents, the reputational cost was real. That's why Nanni writes. He is building the record that forces a practical solution, even without a dramatic courtroom scene. Financing and resets. Remember the macro picture. Rulers sometimes issued clean-slate edicts, broad cancellations of personal debts, to stabilize society. Economic historians note these amnesties generally did not cover commercial silver finance. Translation. A merchant like Ea-nasir couldn't count on a royal bailout if a string of complaints froze his cash. He had to settle, replace, or refund out of working capital, or face default-like pressure. Rebuilding trust. Could Ea-nasir repair his name? Possibly, but not by ignoring complaints. Tablets from the same house context mention other buyers with problems, suggesting a pattern. In a market where a voyage to Dilmun took time and cash, tighter terms, or lost buyers could choke a merchant cycle even after a settlement. The only path forward was the familiar trio: fair weights, receipts, and public accountability. 4,000 years ago, A buyer named Nanni wrote to a merchant named Ea-nasir, "You promised one thing and delivered another. Make it right." That clay tablet, widely cited as the earliest surviving written customer complaint, isn't a legend. It's a catalogued object from a real house context in Ur. Around it sits a small cluster of related tablets and names, suggesting recurring copper disputes in the same circle. That's our human anchor. But the story is bigger than one difficult merchant. By the old Babylonian period, Mesopotamia had already built the bones of commercial order. Tablets as contracts and receipts, standard weights and measures checked in public, courts of judges and elders with testimony and oaths. The Hammurabi tradition standardized measures, punished rigged weights, and set recognizable interest caps, about 20% on silver, about 1/3 on grain. And when household debts threatened to freeze the economy, rulers sometimes issued clean-slate edicts, broad cancellations of personal debts, while commercial silver finance usually stood outside those amnesties. Put together, Nanni's tablet reads like Consumer Protection 101, millennia early. A clear spec, a documented refusal of non-conforming goods, and a trail that can move from private grievance to public remedy, replace, refund, or face penalties. Swap clay for email and scales for digital readouts, and the workflow would fit in any modern small claims court. So, can we call this the first documented commercial fraud in history? We can say it's the earliest surviving, independently verifiable written complaint that details a dispute over quality and conduct, an archetypal fraud scenario anchored to a named merchant, a named buyer, a real city, and a museum record. That phrasing is rigorous, platform-safe, and easy for viewers to verify. Final beat. In Ur, around 1750 BCE, a buyer pressed a grievance into clay, and 4,000 years later, we can still read it. From weights and measures to written receipts, from public hearings to clean-slate resets, the rules that keep markets honest were already taking shape. The tablet of Nanni versus Ea-nasir is more than a museum piece. It's a message from the dawn of commerce. Promises are contracts, quality matters, and trust is measured, one tablet at a time. If you want more fascinating stories about the history of financial crime, subscribe to the channel. I'll keep digging up lesser-known cases so we don't just repeat the usual stories.